So, I mean, it's early days, obviously. We haven't heard much about Indigenous issues so far, but what do you see as the Indigenous-specific issues that are going to come up during this 36-day campaign?
Well, as always, the big question for many Indigenous peoples is whether to vote in the first place, because regardless of how many times we vote, we've had the vote since 1960, things don't tend to change very drastically. Very small, ornamental, incremental changes take place. So the question is a lot of regional issues, mostly around boil water advisories, issue around the implementation of the calls to the action during the TRC, or the Murder Missing Indigenous Women and Girls calls for justice, or other issues involving justice and regionality. But the fact is that Indigenous peoples have to choose first to vote, and then predominantly what are the issues that will be attached, because as usual, the Liberals have promised big, under-delivered, and this is really a referendum on whether they deserve a majority or not.
Well, and exactly to that point, in 2015 election, as we know, record numbers of Indigenous people turned out to the polls and helped push the Liberals to a majority, or maybe perhaps more accurately sent Stephen Harper's Conservatives packing, depending how you choose to look at it. But then in 2019, not the case, right? More of us stayed home. So I guess what are you anticipating in terms of Indigenous voter turnout this time around? Somewhere between 2015, 2019? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, 2019 saw about a 10% drop-off on reserve. It's very hard, of course, to keep track of urban numbers, Métis numbers, but on reserve voting dropped about 10%, and I think it's directly because of apathy involving the Liberals and involving their great promises. I mean, in fact, those promises, many of the promises the Liberals made were just untenable. Trying to say we're going to implement all of 94 calls to action in one term is impossible, so why make the promise in the first place? The fact is that they haven't delivered on major issues, and that's on issues like, for example, boil water advisories. They've only dealt with about 2/3 of those. Now, that is a landmark achievement, but it still hasn't delivered on the promise. And the fact is that in most areas of the country, almost no change has taken place. In fact, things have gotten worse. Poverty's gotten worse. Youth suicides have gotten worse. We're seeing record numbers of homelessness, most of them that are Indigenous on the prairies here, as just an example. And the answer that the Liberals have provided for homelessness is to move the measure of homelessness so that it appears there's less homeless people than they're really dealing with the issue. So the fact is that I think we're probably going to see more apathy this time around, but we also have a record number of Indigenous peoples who are participating in the election as running as candidates. So that may spell off some kind of loss of interest in the Liberals, for example, or major political parties, and it may be more of a regional election like we saw with Jody Wilson-Raybould getting a great deal of local support.
In 2019, 10 Indigenous candidates were elected to the House of Commons. That's one fewer than in 2015. We've also seen some high-profile Indigenous politicians announce that they're not going to be seeking re-election, though. How do you think it's all going to come out in the wash in terms of when all the votes are had? What do you think we'll have in terms of representation in the House of Commons?
Well, if the early numbers indicate we will see a record number of candidates this time around, we will see more people running, particularly for the NDP Liberals, but you're also seeing a great deal, a number of people who are self-identifying as Métis and running for the Conservatives. Good, bad, great, ugly, whatever that looks like. The fact is that there are people who are probably going to be checking the box of indigeneity, whether we like it or not, and there probably will be a record number of candidates this time around.
Well, I suspect you, like us, will be very keen to watch this all unfold over the next month and see where we come out in the end of it. Thanks so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with us.
Miigwech, thanks.